Hi everyone, I'm TigerLily, show host for TigerLily's Freedom Roar on Freedomizer Radio. Welcome to this, my first official guest podcast, and I am delighted and privileged to introduce as my first guest the person who should either receive the praise or scorn, probably, for my views about government. He's a retired Army officer, a historian, a scholar, a guerrilla warfare expert. He's written for a number of publications, including LouRockwell.com. He's the author of, the name of the book is ZeroGov, Limited Government, Unicorns, and Other Mythological Creatures. He's the founder of ZeroGovcom, where there's a lively debate there about ZeroGov with a whole lot of really smart people. I met my guest at an Oath Keepers Memorial gathering 2 years ago in Memorial Weekend of 2011. He was a speaker there at an Oath Keepers gathering, and what he said changed my life. I mean, it was something that I had, a concept that I had never considered, and that concept is that we don't need government. And so he really shook my world, and my guest is all about liberty. I consider him a really good friend who's been cheering me on through my highs and my lows, through my own liberty related efforts. And through the magic of cyberspace, I am honored to introduce the one, the only, Bill Buppert. Hi, Bill. Welcome.
Hey Lily, it's such an honor to be back on your program again. And yeah, I have fond memories of when we first met. And I met you and your husband, and my wife was there too. And we were there with Stuart Rhodes, and it was a sad occasion. But from those kind of occasions, we're going to make green shoots grow.
Right. It was the Jose Guerrero slaughter, wasn't it? It was just,
Yep.
it was horrific. And that was just when I was beginning to awaken to, things aren't what we, what I thought they were. I mean, you're born with indoctrination through your parents, and that gets perpetuated through school, through public schools, more so. You're a homeschooler, right? Yeah,
We are. We've homeschooled all of our children, and I try to be very specific in my language, Lily. So I'll refer to public schools as government schools, and the civics classes that you and I had when we were youths are nothing more than government obedience classes when you strip away all the bunting.
exactly. I agree. And I think Stefan Molyneux, my favorite philosopher, calls them indoctrination camps. So
Indeed, he does.
yeah,
And Stefan is, if it weren't for him and Ron Paul, I don't think that the liberty movement would be in the place it is today, which is far more advanced than it was.
right, right. I, you wrote an article about Christopher Dorner that really was orgasmic to read. For some reason, it was just, you were just like, you hit the nail on the head. What can you describe that article that is on your website, ZeroGov.com?
Well, I would urge everybody there to go to ZeroGovcom and take a gander. I also have a set of forums that people can visit in which we can have a more detailed discussion of articles that are on the blog or things that people are interested in discussing that they can bring up. Uh, what I basically said about Dorner is it astonished me that here was one single man, a former cop, who paralyzed the state. There were a lot of things I teased out of the incident that disturbed me, and of course, almost 100% of the time when I talk about cops, I find something disturbing because of I consider them to be the probably the apex predator threat to humanity on Earth. There is no other because absent cops among politicians and rulers, they can't do a damn thing to anybody or deprive anybody of freedom and liberty without some kind of enforcement mechanism or arm. And cops, more so than armies throughout history, have been that enforcement arm. I guess the point I really wanted to drive home with that article was not only the vicious way that the cops were able to turn on anybody, like the two women that they launched about 100 rounds into their pickup truck without no PID, positive identification of who they were. They got away with that. I'll tell you, two things disturbed me the most. The first thing was burning him alive in that cabin. They had no idea whether Dorner was alone or not, but they didn't care, much like those two women in the truck. They didn't care about positive identification. And there's some institutional incentives that work towards them having that kind of perspective in their profession. Number one, they are immune to all prosecution, it appears. Only 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000 are held accountable for what you and I would probably spend our lifetimes in jail for if we were to do the very same thing. But they're costumed, they're licensed, and they're status protectors. So therefore, they have special immunities. Police unions find these guys fired, rehired, find them protected. There's a Peaceful Streets project out of Austin that has a terrific corrupt cop of the month thing that they do. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about the police commissioner in Maine. There was a 2-hour and 10-minute torture session of one of the inmates at the hands of 4 of the corrections officers on videotape. When the commissioner discovered this, he didn't take any punitive measures against the officers involved. The punitive measures he took was against the people who had exposed the video in the first place. That's sort of like it's a grain of sand in this huge dune mountain of police corruption. And the other thing that struck me about Dorner and struck me about the Boston bombings and such is that if we tried to distill what the government wages war against, besides freedom and liberty, what it wages war against is self-reliance. Whether it's raw milk, whether it's the food that we put in our bodies, whether it's the way we educate our children, whether it's the way we defend ourselves, whether it's the way we drive, whatever the case may be, if we don't have government supervision, regulation, taxation, and some kind of atomistic attention paid to everything that we do so that they can steer us left and right or whatever direction they want to steer us, it is a war on self-reliance. So in the larger scheme of things, this war about victim disarmament, this war about cop behavior, this war about cops being corrupt and doing these awful things, I mean, you and I can take tens of thousands of examples out of society of this happening, and it all turns around to be a war on self-reliance by government. If it's not a war on self-reliance, the government's not interested in making it a law.
Right, right. I was watching on the internet the live streaming by the news media when they were searching for Christopher Dorner, and I heard the reporters say that the cops ordered them to their helicopters to just go away for their own safety. And that thing about the safety it galls me, because what that's code for is go away so that the world can't have proof of what thugs we are and how we will do whatever the hell we want to do, and the less transparency, the more we can get away with. And
officer safety makes every policeman 007. They have a license to kill. That's exactly what it's about. And what it also implies and infers is that their lives are more valued than the mere mundanes that they rule over.
Yep. And yeah. And it this whole thing, it's prevalent all even throughout the court systems. I mean, anybody who thinks
I'm glad you didn't call it a justice system, Lily, because
yeah.
it's simply a legal system. It's an extraction system. It's an exsanguination system. Exsanguination is where you drain the blood out of people. It's vampiric. It really is. I mean, government is a vampire. I mean, there's so many monstrous analogs you can come up with. As far as bureaucracy, you can call them zombified. As far as their behavior towards us, you can call them vampiric. As far as cops' behavior towards people, it's very werewolf-like in the fact that they're rapacious, they're brutal, they have no concern. You and I have discussed this in the past too, Lily. What really concerns me too is not only the government parrot media complex, where you have so many media folks out there cheering on cops, and you never hear them say a bad word about them. It's almost as if they're paid to do so, but I think it's part of their indoctrination that they believe in officer friendly. and that's the way things work.
Well,
It's just it's an awful thing that we can spend hours talking about cops and why they're such a bane to society.
I can't stand them. I mean, when I was a nurse, I used to think that there was no profession that was more vile than the medical profession, but I found one. I mean, they make these cops make the doctors look like I don't know, Prince Charming compared to what they do. I'm like, oh. And
And all of this, all you know, it's not to say that the society that I think I can say you and I both envision, which is a society of peace, voluntarism, cooperation, persuasion, versus violence, the use of force, and rule at the end of a gun to provide goods and services, as Mark Stevens would say. In the end, what we want to do is just treat each other in a civilized manner.
right,
But what government does is government is an instrument of barbarism.
it sure is. Um, I'll tell you, when I first heard this you speak and that you said, you know, it was about the Jose Guarena's murder, and there was oath keeper after oath keeper that was speaking, and they kept saying, "Oh, it's not the police, it's the policies." And I'll never forget you said, "Bullshit. It's the police." And my husband's like, you know, he's nudging me. He says, "Oh, you're gonna want to know him," you know, and because that was the, you know, I had been kind of sensing that and feeling it, but I had never heard anybody actually say that. And how and when I say things like we don't need government, it's 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 not taken well. How how has it been received? What got you to start this website called ZeroGovcom? Tell me about how you got this started and how it's been received by your friends and family and associates.
Well, it's interesting. I have to make a little caveat here, Lily, and that's that I am not opposed to anything. I am not opposed to all government. I'm just opposed to any government other than self-government, because I do believe that we all have an obligation to govern ourselves in a peaceful sense, and to govern our and therefore we emanate that peace to others, and use the non-aggression principle, which means that I am always against. There are three pillars of my philosophy. The first pillar is I believe in non-aggression principle, which is that I believe that any aggression initiated through force or fraud is wrong. Number two is that my self-ownership, the ability to govern myself, can never be abridged without my consent, which is one reason why I don't vote. And the third one would be any contractual obligations that I enter into, I fulfill. I think from those three simple pillars, one can devise a society that is much more peaceful and productive than the one we have today. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and you and I aren't fond of the drug war, of course, the war on vegetation and other such things. And I thought we were having a discussion. I said, imagine all the Michelangelos, Einsteins, and other brilliant folks, potential folks who are in prison right now, the 7.5 million people on probation, on parole, engaged from the local to the federal level. How many brilliant folks have we literally ruined so they can never have a productive day in their lives that would be matched by what they would have done if they had never been caged in the first place after being kidnapped in the war against vegetation, the war against raw milk? I mean, you name the government war on some kind of human behavior. I think that potential loss is inestimable. There's no way for us to know where we would be now as a civilization if it weren't for government. Because government, they make claims that landing on the moon, the aircraft that we have, the military forces, the technology, and all this stuff, it's all because of government. No, it's all because of individual thinking minds, because groups of minds have no mind. Groups of minds have no virtue. Groups of minds have no morality. Only individuals have that. It is individual potential in the aggregate that makes humanity the great thing that it can be. It's not the fact that other people with guns rule people within tax jurisdiction, like tax cattle, like cattle on a ranch, and move them about as they wish and punish them as they wish. That's the advancement of civilization? There's no way that's the case. As far as my germination, I've been a libertarian for the longest time. I was a Republican at one time. Hi, my name is Bill. I was once a Republican. But
You've been
my
sober
oldest son.
how many years now?
That's right. How many years since I've entered intellectual sobriety, which I
Right.
think
Yes.
libertarianism is.
Uh-huh.
That's right. My oldest son, who just graduated with his MS in mechanical engineering from the University of Idaho, was the one who brought me across the Rubicon as far as anarchy is concerned. For the longest time, I was a minarchist and didn't spend enough Socratic drilling or examination of myself and discussion with others about how absurd the proposition was of believing in something called limited government that doesn't exist and has never existed historically. No one can show me an historical incident or government structure in the past that hasn't exceeded the initial limitations that were imposed on it in the first place within whatever country you pick and whatever time stream you pick. It's impossible. Hence the subtitle to my book. I guess in the end, I am part of an abolitionist project. Lily, I would be presumptuous enough to say that you've joined me in this abolitionist project. You and I are opposed to slavery. First and foremost, we are opposed to slavery. There are two intellectual strains in libertarianism, one of which is consequentialist, one of which is moral. The consequentialists say the reason libertarian is so great is because free markets are so effective. The moralists say the reason libertarian is so great is because it liberates humanity from the bonds of oppression. I think they're both right, but I think they're both wrong in that they don't take it to the logical end. Once I have arrived at the notion that slavery is wrong and that the ownership of other human beings is wrong, I can't go back. And even if it turns out that abolitionism and the unshackling of government from humanity makes us less effective as a species, morally, I cannot go back because I cannot ever justify, rationalize, or enjoin in a crusade that seeks to enslave others. I can't do it. So I guess in some way I'm in a moral corner, but in other ways it's moral liberation because in the end I know what's right, and what's right is the ownership of other human beings is wrong, and that's what taxation and regulation does.
And taxation really is theft.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
and we have as a society used other words to justify what the reality is, like taxation is theft, democracy. I think Stefan referred to it as mob rule, and public schools are forced indoctrination, and when people say, oh, they're so proud to be an American and we're so free. Hell no, we're not free. Just try not paying the taxes on your house and see who really owns your house. It does.
Exactly.
And
Even if you don't have a mortgage on the house, you're still paying the property tax. It appalls me, the property taxes that I pay. I despise paying property tax. And by the way, I'm liberating myself from all of my mortgage property in the U.S. because I'm selling my home in Arizona and I'm selling my deer camp in Idaho. And I'll probably never own property in the United States again if I can help it.
wow.
But in the end, I am forced to fund the government education camps, which is probably the lion's share of all the property taxes that we pay. We're quite literally giving nutrition to our stranglers by doing that. We're quite literally taking our children, we homeschool, so we haven't done it, taking our children, putting them into the maw of the beast and saying, have with them as you will. And there's a reason Adolf Hitler said, and I'm paraphrasing, if I have your child till age 7, I'll have him for life. The government knows this, which is why you see them spending so much time. Well, we want to go back to prenatal care, and we want to make sure that you've got preschool care, and we want to make sure Obamacare is not only abominable in the sense that it is a tax. It is not only that. What's horrific about Obamacare is that by harnessing the power of monitoring our health, they're going to take our ability to ingest the diet we wish, the exercise we wish to do, and all of these things, and they're going to bureaucratize it. And they're going to punish those who don't do what they wish us to do. For instance, I'm a paleo primal guy, which means that I don't believe the FDA food pyramid is right. I think it's upside down. As a matter of fact, I think grains, I think wheat, I think carbs, I think sugars are deadly to the human body. We weren't built for that. Over 50,000, 100,000 years of human evolution, we weren't built to be an agricultural species per se. So I ate a considerable amount of protein. I ate a considerable amount of fat. I love fatty foods. I'll gladly eat a pound of bacon. My wife is probably shivering right now when she hears this. I'm glad to eat that kind of stuff, and I'm very healthy as a result of that. It's sort of like what you discover as a libertarian and an abolitionist is you start to life hack. Life hacking means that you're trying to find a more effective way to live your life. The reason why you do this life hacking is because everything you've been taught has been a lie. We've all spent 12 to 16 to 18 years in various government-ruled education institutions, and you get indoctrinated. That's just the way the system works. I have spent the last 10 to 15 years unscrewing myself historically and finding out the real history. I've spent the last 5 years, my wife's a nutritionist, unscrewing a lifetime of eating wrong. Now that I'm eating right, things are going well. I've life hacked my exercise program. I no longer go to the gym. I do all isometrics and polymetrics, and it's an extraordinarily effective program. Something, of course, the government would probably frown upon because of self-reliance. But we go through the whole gamut. I mean, Lily, you can probably look at your own life and you can say, what are the things that I was raised to do throughout my life that when I reflect and drill down deep enough, whether emotionally, philosophically, or intellectually, I discover I'm 180 degrees out, and I'm going to unscrew it, and I'm going to do the right thing. I'll bet 10 years ago, you and I had a completely different notion of what cops were about.
Oh, yeah.
But now, through hard trials, yours more than mine, you've discovered that the veil is lifted, the curtain is removed, and you know what's there, and it's pretty monstrous.
Well, and what I've experienced was, has not been, I spent 24 hours in a holding tank because I got to watch my son get Rodney Kinged, and I was videotaping, and I was charged for obstruction and then convicted, and then I, was found not guilty on appeal after a judge pointed his finger at me and said, you could have exercised more common sense. How the hell? I mean, I was 30 feet away. I was not interfering with whatever they were doing, and I was restraining myself as they were brutalizing my son, who had just gotten out of the hospital, who had spent a whole month in the hospital, almost had his arm amputated, and they brutalized him right in front of me. And so when that's nothing. I mean, that's having witnessed that is nothing compared to the Jose Garena situations. He was a homeless guy that was just beaten up to just.
And he was begging for his father the entire time that they were
that's the
meeting.
one. Yes.
There's no humanity. There's no humanity.
No.
And you bring up such a critical point here, Lily. Of those 7.5 million dregs, who I consider victims, who are caged on probation and parole, they've all got families. All of them have families. They've got brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, fathers, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, all people. They're all victims of the system. You don't have to spend a day behind bars. All you have to do is go visit your family behind bars, and you're just as imprisoned and emotionally wrecked as they are. So what we have here is we have tens, I would venture to say probably near 100 million folks in America who have been victimized by this legal system. And I hate to say this, but there will be a day of reckoning one day. They're going to hit the wrong house. They're going to do the wrong thing. And people are just fed up. I can't tell you. Now, there's confirmation bias, of course, here. I can't tell you the number of people, though, who I've talked to when I relate the story of my son, for instance, and his embroilment in the legal system, where they'll say, yeah, it happened to my son, or it happened to my cousin, or it happened to my nephew. And you always see not necessarily a glint of regret in their eyes, but almost they're just appalled at the behavior that they've been taught. With cops, we've all been taught it's officer friendly. He's there to help you.
Right.
And you can see, though, you can see the doubt, you can see the skepticism, and even the most stalwart police defenders today. I don't know whether that's simply anecdotal. I don't know whether it's because we've seen this exponential increase in police militancy and thuggery, but I think people are starting to get a clue. Eric Peters, who writes for Lou Rockwell, if you haven't looked at his stuff, I've seen that guy make a turnaround in the last 5 years. That's astonishing. He refers to all the believers as clovers. It's pretty
Really?
funny. Yeah.
You know, and speaking of the evolution, I've even seen I've seen a tremendous amount of evolving of my own um, how I perceive things. But even you, I've seen how you're transitioning and you get even more evolved with every article that you write. Have you changed in like at what point is violence justified in order to preserve yourself? Has that
Well,
changed at all?
I'm not a pacifist because that's the road to extinction.
Hmm.
And if you read about Gandhi, what you'll discover is that with his Satyagraha movement, which was his movement where what he would do is he would not defend himself even when struck.
Hmm.
But the whole idea in his movement was that eventually there would be such moral outrage at the pictures of destruction of human beings that they would see that the powers that be would finally leave. And that's what happened with the Brits. And it did work to a certain extent. And Gandhi, and I paraphrase, was also the one who said that the darkest day in Indian history was when the British took away our ability to defend ourselves with guns.
Wow.
So the Satyagraha campaigns were not successful at first, but they started to gain momentum. What I'm seeing today, and this is anecdotal, of course, is that people are starting to become rather repulsed by the story after story, these hundreds of police brutality stories that are going on. Now, I'll tell you that Boston did not make my heart sing at all. And when they're out there chanting USA after all their homes have been violated in such a substantial fashion, I'm not a constitutionalist by any stretch, but for those who are constitutionalists, to have your Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights ripped away, I think that there's probably dozens or hundreds of stories too of cop thuggery that we have yet to see to come out of that Boston affair in those 24 hours where people were busting into people's homes. When the cops come to somebody's home, and I saw some of the video footage, they come to somebody's home and they quite literally put guns in their faces, tell them to put their hands in the air and frog march them out of their own homes. And you and I both trust cops as far as we can toss them, which,
Hmm.
by the way, most of them are overfed. You couldn't toss them very far. When you look at picture a dozen cops going through your home, and you're not there, you're standing outside. Would you trust them? I don't trust them. I don't think they're going to do the right thing. I never have the sense that they're there to do the right thing anymore, ever.
Amen. Amen. I don't trust him as far as I could throw him. I was watching on a somebody who took a videotape of that Massachusetts when they were going through the houses. There was, you know, they were the tanks. I don't know if you saw the tanks going through. It was like something out of, you know, Afghanistan or something. The militarization, the and and there was a guy inside of his house who was videotaping with his phone, and a cop from the tank pointed his gun at him. And I'm thinking, holy cow. I mean, he came that close to being executed for pointing.
I saw that very same video, and I was pretty shocked. And I think those are MRAPs. And by the way, those mine-resistant vehicles, the Department of Homeland Security has ordered 3,000 of those. In Afghanistan and Iraq, they're everywhere. They're huge hulking beasts, but they can't be defeated if one is determined enough. But they're coming to the streets of America. It's just like all the other military surplus that you see the cops, using in Boston. One thing that encourages me about Boston, and I said this on one other program. Do you remember seeing Star Wars? And the reason why Star Wars struck you as so strange was that all the vehicles look used.
Yeah, okay,
They
good.
weren't sparkling models they looked like they had been through hell.
Hmm.
You'll notice that none of the vehicles, none of the equipment, none of the stuff look like what a soldier's looks like after 12 hours,
Okay.
or after 3 days, or after a week. They haven't been using it. You can have the best kit on planet Earth, but if you haven't habituated yourself to tactically practicing with it and working with it and using it and testing it to its effective capabilities, It's one thing to have that kit, but it's quite another to use it with alacrity. There's a lot of folks in America who can use it with alacrity. There's a lot of returning veterans coming home who could use that stuff well and effectively. It may not be pretty, but they can use it. And one of the other reasons I think you saw so many cops on the outside of those vehicles is because they wouldn't fit on the inside.
Because they're too fat, have been eating too many donuts, or what?
Indeed, indeed they are. It's an interesting phenomenon with cops.
Well,
I don't
that's why
know
they shoot, because
what
they
the
can't
statistics
catch
are.
them. As a historian, where do you see that we're going? I mean, how much more of this can we take? I mean, the Kool-Aid, the people are still so indoctrinated. You're still getting lamestream media, with the cameras up the faces of the sheeples that are saying, well, yeah, if it's for our safety, thank you, we really appreciate it. And what is it going to take? What the hell
We
is it
have to
going to
put
take?
this in historical perspective. No empire lasts. Secession is not the exception, it's the rule. Resistance is not the exception, it's the rule. And the calving off of smaller states from larger states is the rule, not the exception. There are peaceful ways to do it, like the Czech-Slovak split. There are semi-peaceful ways to do it, like the 18 countries that calved off of the southern portion of the USSR from 1989 to 1991. And there's the more violent aspects, like our divorce from the United Kingdom that started April 19th, 1775. And for 8 years, we fought them to get them off of us, and finally did so. We were free in 1783, but then we shackled ourselves again in 1791 when we adopted the Constitution. My prognosis for the future is that all countries die. All governments and nation states die. There's a variety of factors. Number one, the first law of thermodynamics: for every action there is an equal reaction, and the law of entropy, that bigger doesn't make better. And I'm convinced that America is too big to succeed as a country. It simply can't harness its economic effectiveness nor keep its economic house in order with the size that it is and the incentives that are in place to manage the monies that they have. Now, is it going to happen tomorrow? Is it going to happen next year, 10 years from now, 50 years from now? I don't have a crystal ball. As a matter of fact, if I had a really good gauge of that, Lily, I'd be far more wealthy than I am now. I'm not. So, but it's an inevitability. It's going to happen. And I guess, I've been telling people this for years because they always manage to ask me, well, what do I do to prepare? It's going to be G3 and critical thinking. It's going to be guns, gold, and groceries. And by the way, gold and silver markets, if you've been watching them, anybody in your audience who's been watching those, it is a buying opportunity right now. Silver and gold have really plummeted in price, which means that that's a purchase signal for everybody who's paying attention. Same with food, same with guns, get them while you can. But like I mentioned earlier, it's great to have guns, but if you don't train with them, if you're not effective with them, if you don't have the associated kit to keep them maintained and to keep them tuned and such, they're pretty worthless. You might as well just get a ball bat. And of course, critical thinking, which means to do what you and I and most every American do, which is cross-examination is the engine of truth. We need to drill, we need to examine, we need to look at our own biases, we need to look at the biases of the sources that we're examining. We need to become intellectually curious, we need to become historically examined, and we need to realize that wherever you come from, if you don't know where that is, you can't possibly know where you are now.
Or where you're going.
Exactly.
Wow.
Or as Buppert Banzai would say, wherever you go, there you are.
I started watching that movie on Netflix that you recommended. Hell on Wheels. Okay, that's the one. Yeah, I just saw the first episode and I've watched it twice because you catch nuances the second time before I go on to the second episode, and it's fascinating. I mean, it's like history repeating itself over and over and over.
Over and over again.
Right.
Hell on Wheels, for those in your audience who aren't aware, just finished its second season. I highly recommend it. It's an AMC production. It's set in, I think, 1865 or 1866, shortly after the War of Northern Aggression has ended. And the main protagonist is Colin, I forget his last name, Colin, bearded fella. My wife loves him because he's really hunky. And he's a former rebel who is seeking revenge for what the Union soldiers did to his family. It's sort of outlaw Josie Wales on a railroad.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. Well, in that first episode that I'm watching, it was right after the slaves got freed, and there's some black freed new freed slaves that are building the railroad, and the one black guy is in his tent and he's looking at the Emancipation Proclamation because he's just been had the crap kicked out of his friend, and he says, "This is about as good just to wipe my ass on it." It's like,
Right.
yeah, he got it way back then. I
It is.
mean,
Yes.
there's another one on Netflix that I have watched, and it's about it's fiction, but it's really about what goes on with the um, our elected officials and how absolutely corrupt they are. And I have seen this and experienced it firsthand with the stupid helmet law in Nevada. Would you believe, Bill, that the senator who for the eighth time submitted a helmet choice bill he in Nevada, he canceled it because of me. He canceled the whole thing just because of me. And he sent me an email. He sent it to everybody and says, you know, I have bigger fish to fry. I can't deal with you high maintenance motorcycle people until you put a muzzle on this lady because she's being disrespectful to my colleagues. And this is the libertarian, Republican, benevolent guy. You know, so
Are you serious?
I'm as serious as a freaking heart attack. And I'm going to be reading that email and I'm going to podcast that bad boy because, you know, it's amazing that one person can be blamed to take away liberty. And one person, like one text messenger that killed somebody, now the parents can get this anti-text messaging law passed. So creating more laws is so easy, but to repeal them, all it takes is one loudmouth like me, and they'll say, "Oh hell no, we're gonna keep you in helmet bondage until you can put a muzzle on her." And I don't even live in Nevada anymore. You know, I
Well, it shows you how petty and how concerned they are about maintaining their positions of privilege, and
Mhm.
they'll do anything they can to maintain that position. But as far as doing what their office was actually designed to do in the first place, they have no concern for that.
Right,
It's all about, as you said, passing laws. It's a factory.
right, and
Politics is a factory,
right,
and it's a factory of oppression, torture, and that chain that I'm so fond of espousing, which is that depending on your level of resistance, you will be fined, kidnapped, caged, maimed, or killed.
right, right.
That's the system we live in. That's the land of the free and the home of the brave. That's its primary operating system. If it had an operating system like Windows or Apple, that would be it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And,
Yeah.
I saw somebody today. I went to an anarchy meeting, and I saw somebody. I didn't know if he was an anarchist or not. He wasn't. He had a Laughlin River Run T-shirt, and Laughlin River Run is like the biggest West Coast, I guess, motorcycle, function or whatever event, like conference or whatever. And I asked him if he went to it this year, and he said no, but he went to it last year, and last year it was just fine, and there were no problems. And I said, well, I used to be a reporter for a motorcycle magazine, and when I went to the parking lots out there, I saw cops left and right doing all kinds of really bad things. And you know what he said? I mean, I couldn't believe he was, well, all you got to do is, mind your manners. It's like, oh my God, he has no clue. I mean, did he not see the video that went viral where a cop rear-ended a biker on the strip, and the cop went to the biker and yelled at him and used profanity and terrorized the poor guy, and actually that cop, um, he wasn't fired, but he had enough time to retire, and the video went viral. The only thing that gratifies me is that at least he retired in disgrace. And that's the only thing, that's the one thing that gratifies me, because there just almost never seems to be any justice. They can just do what they can, crap on you, they can do anything they want to and get away with it. And I had a judge tell me about cops and about elected officials. She said, you know, if there wasn't immunity, we wouldn't be able to find anybody to take these jobs. I've got that on an audio recorder that she.
Yet there are twice as many private security companies out there, mall cops, private security for escort, and those kind of things. You don't see viral videos of brutality on their part. That's because their entire lives stake, their homes, their mortgages, their families, their entire income future is based on their bonding and insuring for their good behavior.
Right.
But that's not the case for Garenia's killers, for instance.
Exactly.
When Garenia was murdered in his home, those SWAT cops got a free pass, got a hand wave, probably got some free time at home on pay, paid suspension and such. And they just go on their merry way. And who pays for it? The citizens of Pima County. Probably, if the lawsuit wins, to the tune of $2 million for their malfeasance and their incompetence. But that's the way the system works. You know, I think you've read this in my articles. 19,000 police departments, Lily. 19,000. 1 million plus sworn statist officers. That's a big army.
1 million. The last I had checked was 900,000, and that was like a year or two ago. So
I think it's near a million.
Oh my God.
But 19,000 departments, it just boggles the mind.
There's no way. I mean, with the amount of money that we owe, I mean, the economy the way it is, how is this even rational to think that it's in the least bit sustainable?
It is not sustainable. It's a totally unsustainable system. But when you're in a predator system like this, they don't think to the future. You know, I don't think that you and I, neither you or I, could credit the government with being really good at extrapolating second and third order effects and unintended consequences. They tend not to do that. They tend to be rather short-sighted. The latest IRS fiasco is emblematic of that. Our involvement in the wars in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Yemen, and Syria, and Pakistan, and now in the Horn of Africa and such, we have no idea of the iatrogenic effect. You're from the medical community. So iatrogenic means you set out to do something, but you're doing 180 degrees out of what you set out to do. That's mostly what government does. Government is iatrogenic effect at large. It's what it does for a living.
And there's no way you can hold them accountable to their promises when they're campaigning. No way. And
don't vote.
I don't anymore. I learned my lesson. Voting is criminal, I think.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
yes, it is. You know what? I would go so far as to say it's an act of aggression. I think Stefan would agree with that.
Yeah, he would. He would.
Yeah.
Criticism. Since I've been on this bandwagon, because most of my friends, you know, I grew very rapidly. I mean, it's like all of a sudden, like the meteor hit, and it's like I exploded. And there was a huge backlash, you know, people, death threats, you know, on the email, like this, name calling me. I mean, and then I have a colleague who was a guy who says, oh, that's David Stilwell and his droopy-eyed girlfriend. And I'm thinking of all the things that they can criticize about me. My beak nose is more, you know, it's funnier than my droopy eyes, for heaven's sakes. I mean, anything, and they've called me every name in the book. Have you had that kind of thing where people say to you, "Are you nuts? We have to have a government."
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a revolutionary and paradigmatic shift to think that self-ownership and the removal of all human slavery should be done immediately. Either people agree with it or they disagree with it, but they also say, well, that's a pipe dream. Well, I would submit to you that at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, it was William Wilberforce in England who said the ownership of human beings is wrong, and he was laughed at by everybody. And I think Ron Paul said something to the effect, and it may not be Ron Paul, but he was quoting somebody else, and I'm paraphrasing again because of my addled memory. First, they ridicule you, but eventually, the reason that they're ridiculing you is because you're on the right path. Mm-hmm. So they can ridicule you all you want. You can just, smile and wave, boys. Just smile and wave, because in the end, we're right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm getting better at that because, and I never pick the fights. I try not to pick the fights, but when the shots come at me, and that was what one of that senator who pulled that bill said. He said, you can catch a lot more flies with honey than with vinegar, and my mama told me to swat the fly and don't let it land on dinner. I mean, it's like, and so that's kind of what I've been doing. And life is temporary. I'm 52. Longevity does not run in my family. My kids are grown. My parents are dead. Nobody really depends on me for their lively, for their survival or whatever. So I have nothing to lose to keep striking at these little, cowardly cops, because that's what they are. They are cowardly cops and bootlickers who support them.
Well, look, in the end, cross-examination is the engine of truth. And when people approach you and they say, Lily, you're irrational, or your lack of belief in the government is wrong and such, conduct what I would call Socratic drilling, which is where ask the question why 3 times. Okay, so you think cops are necessary, and you set the preconditions for why cops are so corrupt, so venal, so brutal, and prey on so many people. Why do we need them? And keep asking the question why. If you can ask that question why 3 times, eventually you will be able to arrive at either a substantive reason for why they feel the way you do, or the way they do, because you know why you feel the way you do. But in the end, they're going to discover that they're bumper sticker sloganeering, that they really don't have a moral fiber to what they're trying to support. And that in the end, what we're trying to do here is show people that the moral fiber is in self-ownership. The moral fiber emanates from the individual, not from the collective. Because if we go to the collective, historically, that always turns into a slaughterhouse. Always. There are no exceptions. Ask the American Aboriginals in the 19th century.
And, a lot of, most of what I get is, how will the roads get done? How can we do this? How can we do that? When the real question is, is it moral?
I love that question. I love the question about how the roads are built.
Well, one of the,
Again,
what's your answer?
Up until 1922, there were private arterials across the country at the major urban centers and even connecting major urban centers that were privately funded. Why were they privately funded? Because how can you sell commerce if you can't get it to your customers? And when people say, but Bill, who will build the roads? My response is always the same as for all those questions: people will. When I was in Idaho, I maintained a 3/4 mile driveway to get to the main arterial. I've always lived in a rural area. I can't stand living in cities. I live in Arizona now. I had to maintain a 1/2 mile dirt road to my arterial. I don't let the dirt road decay, get bumped up and destroyed to the extent where I can't travel across it, because then that doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit my self-interest. 60% of the roads in Kansas are privatized. Privatized in the sense that they're dirt roads, semi-primitive roads, whatever the case may be. It's a chimera. It's an illusion that they live with. For instance, food. I've done this thought experiment with people where it's the 1930s, and all of a sudden, Roosevelt, one of the worst presidents we've ever had, and he's in big company when it comes to being the worst president. He says, hypothetically, you know what? Food is so important, its delivery will be a government function. Can you imagine what that would look like 70 years later? Can you imagine what that food would be like? And then Lily and Bill would stand up and say, I'll bet the private market could take care of food delivery. I'll bet we could even name places like Safeway. Maybe we'll come up with imaginative names like Publix or Albertsons or something like that.
Right.
And you could have competition so that people can go where they please, get the food that they wished, pay the price that they wanted, because they're not going to pay the price if they don't want to, because no one's holding a gun to their head. And I'll bet the selection will be far greater than it would be with government provisioning of that service, because in case after case after case, we see what that looks like. But Lily and Bill would say that, but millions of people would say, but if we privatize food delivery, how will people eat?
Right. Yeah, because they're just
It's
stuck
it's
in their
it's
matrix.
it's 1805, Lily,
Hmm.
and the slavery is coming to an end in Great Britain, and people are panicked and they're saying, without slaves, how will we survive?
How will the cotton get picked, right?
How will the cotton get picked?
And somebody said,
Or
well,
the bumper sticker I saw was, if I'd known it had been this much trouble, I would have picked my own damn cotton. And I hope you can get in touch with Larkin Rose and have him on one of your podcasts, because along with Stefan
Mhm.
and Ron Paul, Larkin, that guy is a force to be reckoned with in the liberty movement. He wrote Government, the Most Dangerous Superstition, but he puts together these terrific videos and montages, and one of the ones that he put together was where all the slaves are on the plantation, and then they're all freed, but they're still on the plantation,
Right.
and nothing much has changed
I've seen
because
it.
government's taken over
Mhm.
where their slave owners were in the first place.
Right. I don't know if I came up with this idea or if I should credit it to somebody else, but thinking about how would the roads be made, I'm thinking if it wasn't for government, maybe we wouldn't even need roads. I mean, why is it that in this day and age of high technology, I can't put on a backpack and jet myself over from Polygamyville to Las Vegas? I mean,
I agree.
I
I
mean,
agree
there's
100%.
no reason why we can't. Yeah, government is stifling our creativity.
Lily, we'd be on the moon by
Creating,
now.
yeah, just uh, our human potential has just barely begun to unleash itself, and it would unleash exponentially if we could just get rid of these superstitions, the most dangerous one of which is, like Rose Larkin says, government.
Absolutely, and I would recommend that if your audience gets a chance to read two books on bureaucracy, one of which was penned by Ludwig von Mises and the other which was penned by Edmund Wilson. But one of the things that you really tease out of these books is that the worst bureaucrats are actually the most effective bureaucrats from a bureaucrat's perspective. The dim bulbs, I bandy about this term called cacocracy, which is where you have rule by the worst, the most venal, the most filthy, the most wicked, the most corrupt.
Coming from the word
That's
caca.
that's that's what government is. It's a cacocracy. But tell me if you haven't experienced this, or any of your audience members haven't. A bureaucracy will elevate those people who go by the letter of the law. The reason why they go by the letter of the law is because they don't have the imagination to realize how context works, nor how the spirit of the law is entailed in effectiveness. That it's beyond the pale for them. So that's why they'll say, nope, your tangerine has to be under 31 centimeters, or else I'm going to place you under arrest.
Right. Please tell me what a legal helmet is.
Exactly.
Nobody has been able to explain what a legal helmet is. There is no such thing. And it just, oh my God.
Philip Jenkins wrote a book called The Death of Common Sense, in which he said that the more specific you make a law, the more loopholes you create.
Yeah, yeah. And
And the more loopholes you create, the more scofflaws you create, which in my mind is a good thing. People who tend to skirt the law. But in this case, we have so many laws. I wrote an essay about that about 2 years ago. The government doesn't know how many laws it has on the books. The I think it was the ABA, the American Bar Association, spent 6 months trying to discover how many laws are on the books, and they didn't come up with a number.
probably in the
How scary is
millions.
that?
Yeah. I mean, just, when I commute from Nevada to Utah, both states are open carry states, but in Utah, you can't have a bullet in the chamber. So I have to remember to not make to take
You're kidding.
no, you have to take the bullet out of the chamber. So my husband, he's real anal retentive about that thing. Did you get your bullet out of the chamber? Because we don't want to violate the law because you've already been in jail once, and he doesn't want to get stressed out. But yeah, I don't leave home without, and even in home, I've got my gun. And it's very empowering everywhere I go. My gun, it's very, very empowering. And I always thought it was just, kind of you know, support the gun rights people because I believe in the right to bear arms and all of that,
Yeah.
but it's bigger than that. It's much, much bigger than that. And I think,
It's liberty's key.
yeah, yeah. Um, oh, and in that episode, somebody said, "Do you believe in a higher power?" And he opened up his thing and he says, "It's right here." It was his gun.
Indeed.
That's a
Indeed.
good one. I'm going to use that.
Yep. Hell on Wheels rocks as a study in not only government corruption but anarchic living. You know, the point that I meant to say earlier is that we all live as anarchists in our daily lives
Yes, we do.
every day with our families, with our friends, with our communities. You know, whenever you help an old lady across the street, or you lend money to a friend, or you give money to a friend, or you help them repair their car, whatever the case that is, or whatever kind of human transaction with other members of your community, whether they're friends or family, whenever that happens, that is a gift of anarchy.
Yeah,
It's not a gift of government.
exactly. You know,
Yeah.
that happened today. I stopped to go get some Mexican pastries because I'm gonna head on over to where there's no Mexican pastries tomorrow. And there's this little Mexican guy came up to me and he's talking in Spanish and he says, "I'm so hungry and can you just give me $5 for?" And you know, usually I don't get panderers because I got a gun, but evidently he didn't care. And so I said, "Here you go." So I just gave him $5. It was just easier, you know, and I kind of felt sorry
Yeah.
for the little guy, you know. And he
Yeah.
didn't look like a drunk and he just really looked pathetic. So I gave him $5, you know. Well, do you have any final thoughts?
I
Because
do. As a matter of fact, there's a place called the Police State on my forum over which TigerLily presides. That's TigerLily's
that's
preserve. So, so if you get a chance in the audience, if there's questions that you have about this particular program or something Lily would want to use as a forum to extend the conversation, you're always welcome to come back there and post as you please on ZeroGov.com. And if you go to ZeroGov.com, that'll bring you to my blog, and then you'll see a little forum tab on there that will take you to my forum. And we're always looking for new folks. If you don't agree with the abolitionist project, it's even more reason for me to have you on, because all it does, not only does it sharpen our rhetorical skills, but if for some reason you come up with an evidentiary case that calls into question in a very large way why we may be in the wrong direction, we'll re-steer and go in the other direction.
very good.
Cross-examination is the engine of truth.
Absolutely. And the name of your book again?
Zero Gov, Limited Governments, Unicorns, and Other Mythological Creatures.
And how can we get it?
Amazon, $2.99. I'm
So,
working on a novel as we speak,
oh,
which I hope to publish next year.
where do you get the
It's called The
time?
Cancel Club.
Where do you get the time? Oh my gosh,
I don't,
that's
I
amazing.
don't have much time. I'm working full-time on my grad degree, which I should finish the end of June.
Mhm.
And I work hellacious hours at my present position, but I just make the time.
That's
Much as I
amazing.
make the time to eat right, stay away from the Mexican pastries, Lily, and exercise right. So,
Well, thank you so much for taking this hour out of your very important, your limited schedule and everything. I really appreciate it, Bill. I just love you to death. I love your work and your passion and your support of me. That means the world to me. So thank you so much, and I look forward
well,
to seeing.
Lily, I think you've done great things, and it was quite serendipitous, and I feel fortunate that we met at the Garanian meeting 2 years ago, and we're just going to drive on, and we're going to move forward for liberty.
Absolutely. Have a great one. Thank you, Bill.
You too.
Take
See ya.
care.
Bye.
Bye.